All right, hello everyone. Welcome today. A new month, July. Kind of crazy. Seems like the months have been going by rather quickly. So today, if you weren't here last week, will be the last actual session of this series called 2023 Tournament Experiences. So we've had 9 so far. This will be the 10th of the series and final one. So definitely it's been a fun little ride. It's been, I think, almost 5 or 4, maybe 5 months now. And so definitely appreciate everyone who's made it out to most of the classes and hope you've enjoyed so far. We have now kind of reached the end of 2023 in November, middle of November. The previous tournament that we reviewed was the Florida GM Round Robin, in which I had a pretty mediocre start. Kind of was still fumbling with some of my mentality as well as psychology towards the tournament, as well as not allowing myself to play stress-free in the games. So now we come to the tournament starting in mid to late November in New York City. In the first round, I met International Master Casa Corley, who I had some experience playing from here and there. And I will say I was like pretty excited to play this tournament, especially coming off a good result in Florida, and was definitely on the right foot to start with this win right here. But we'll see how the game actually was not so straightforward, and from the early opening, I made a few critical mistakes. Now, since today is the last day and we will have quite a few stopping points, I will very likely restrict the chat just to send it to me, just to keep the class going for today and keep the class kind of rolling so that either I'm not distracted by the ongoing chat, the flowing chat, or you guys are not distracted by your friends' chats or whatnot. So I do notice today is a lower turnout, at least so far. I think a lot of people are probably in Philadelphia right now playing the Philadelphia Nationals / World Open. I'm actually not playing the tournaments, taking a little bit of a break. As I told you guys last week, I had a very tough month, and I dropped from 2482 to 2431 in my pursuit of the Grandmaster title. So I have all the norms. This right here will be my last norm that I'm showing you guys, the tournament itself, but still I'm working on getting to 2500. Okay, so let's get through the game, and hopefully we can hit all the critical moments that occurred. So I actually for this game relied on some of my previous preparation. I wasn't necessarily expecting Casa to play the Slav, and so what you guys might notice is that early on I wasn't as acquainted with some of the main ideas, and Casa kind of surprised me early on with the line that he chose. So for those of you guys who play Slav from both sides, it's actually a very topical line where white goes e3 instead of perhaps the main line of knight c3. So now with e3, bishop f5, black is able to, because white chose a little bit more of a solid approach, get the bishop out of the pawn chain. White now goes knight h4, bishop e4, f3, bishop g6. This is a very, very typical main line, and one that I've played quite a few times, both from the white side as well as from the black side. I played queen b3 first, queen c7, bishop d2, and eventually captured on g6. Played e4 here, and my opponent goes b5. All right, so I kind of sped through the opening a little bit there, but the most important part will be this middle game right here. So Casa came late to the game, so I had a little bit of a time advantage, but for the most part had blitzed out all the way to this point with this move b5. Now, as I mentioned, I was not so acquainted with these middle game ideas, especially this move b5. Typically what happens is that because of white's pressure on the b7 pawn, we don't really need to worry about this h2 pawn being a problem right here. And in general, white has some very good pressure with the center as well as the bishop pair. So my opponent goes b5, And I wasn't fully sure if black's idea was to play a4. For example, what I could try here is, for example, move like a3, allow black to go a4, maybe stick my queen on, let's say, b2, and maybe even allow black to capture on h2 and play a position like this. It was something that I was considering during the game, but at the end of the day, decided against. I decided to instead play c4 to initiate contact right here. And my whole point is that, for example, a line like takes, if black goes after my pawn on h2, I'll take, and maybe even go like queen b7 here. And now we actually can win some material. So for example, on queen g1 check, I can even slide back with bishop f1, making sure that we don't lose the rook on a1. And now some material will be lost for black. So this is my whole point with this move c4. All right, so I go c4. My opponent now captures on c4. I capture it back, and then here now black won 97. So actually a little bit of a unexpected continuation here on my part. I kind of totally forgot about this move knight d7 and about how the fact that rook b8 is actually coming very annoyingly. And now I have problems along the b file, as well as I still have to keep in mind this pawn on h2 is hanging. So here I spent a little bit of time and decided to play g3. Very logical move, basically defending the pawn on h2 via blocking this diagonal. And so now black goes rook b8. So black goes rook b8. I go queen to d3, protecting my queen, getting off the b file. And here black goes bishop to b4. All right, so this will be the first stopping point here, the first critical moment of the game. Like I said, I am going to restrict the chat, so you guys can only talk to myself as well as the other co-host. So this will be the first stopping point, white to play, and find the best sequence of moves. White actually has to tread quite carefully in order not to be in trouble. And unfortunately here, I did not choose the best path forward. All right, so you guys can send the answers to me privately. We're going to go, let's go a minute and a half on this one, so 90 seconds. Okay, so just entered. It's white to play here. We're going to give everyone one more minute to make the decision. All right, just about finishing up here. Feel free to send in your answers. I see a few people giving the best continuation, though perhaps not seeing actually the whole picture. So in general, I think most people realize that the safest option here would be to castle, would simply be to castle. Okay. And it's the most logical option, perhaps also why I didn't give you guys as much time as I normally would, as this is a positional decision. And so for those of you who played castle, most people gave castle as just kind of, that's the only move that they had, didn't really give maybe even like a substantiation or a reason or a variation. And positionally, you would be correct. However, I didn't see anyone express concern about the tactic of knight to e5. Knight to e5. And so, well, I'll tell you guys exactly what my thought process was. So as soon as I saw this, basically the position was this. I was hovering my like hand over the king to play castles. And then like basically at the corner of my eye where I'd realized, oh, 95 is happening. So I took my hands down. I saw 95. And I was like, wow, I can't go for that. And so then in a split-second decision, instead of taking my time and recollecting myself, I instead opted to take on b4. I don't think I saw anyone suggest this move, perhaps. Yeah, I don't think anyone suggests this move, but after bishop takes b4, rook takes b4, my intention here was to castle. And then I had a cold shower, literal cold shower, because I realized now, after castles, there's rook b2. And actually now I'm totally screwed. The pawn on h2 is attacked, and then, I can't even play h4 because the g3 pawn would fall, and white's in big, big trouble here. Okay, so basically my sight of this tactic 95 was actually kind of holding me back here. So 95, bishop f4 is some people are mentioning to me. This is that, certainly an idea. And now here the continuation goes takes, rook c8, something like this, and it's fairly balanced here, fairly balanced, fairly equal. And this is what I should have gone for. First of all, I didn't realize bishop f4 was a move. I at least I didn't even remember, I didn't collect myself and think about the position. And I thought that I only would have this, and after rook d8, same thing. Black is infiltrating, very, very uncomfortable position here for white. So yes, this is correct. After 95, white has this bishop f4 move, which is nice. And after this continuation of takes, I believe rook c8, something like this is fairly balanced. Maybe we can even throw in bishop a5 here as well. So basically there, I should have just collected myself and, taken that extra minute, extra 2 minutes to see if there was any response to 95. Because, as most people pointed out, the move itself, castling, is a secure move. And so there's actually a reason why king f2 is not a good move. Some people were giving king f2 as perhaps a safer option to connect the rooks because the h2 pawn is still defended by the rook. But now 95 is actually a big, big deal. All right, so this tactic would actually be devastating because no more bishop f4, obviously, because now this is check. And after takes, now rook d8 comes with even more full force. So this would not be good at all for white. So instead, I take on b4. And after my opponent's relatively immediate recapture, I started to realize and kind of go into the tank, like, what am I going to do here? Okay, and the big issue is that this rook is not only active, threatening rook to b2, also kind of impedes my queen from being mobile. And I also have to worry about all these tactics of even like queen takes g3 as a possibility. This is actually a very real possibility. Queen takes g3, h takes, and rook takes h1, which would pick up the other rook. So that's another thing I have to be aware of. So here I go queen c3. And my opponent now goes queen b6. I went rook to d1, defending the d4 pawn as well as preventing rook b1 check ideas. Now my opponent goes rook to b2. I went h4, kind of like the only choice here. I mean, castles does not protect the h2 pawn, obviously. And a move like rook to d2 would be would have the same effects. Now rook b1, I'm forced to go like rook d1. And even though this is potentially an option, it was very scary. And so instead, I went h4, queen b8. And now I made an incorrect and inaccurate choice for it here. Yeah, hopefully you guys can hear me. No idea what just happened. Man, chess base 7. Oh, can you guys hear me? Okay. Wow. Man, chess base really is not okay. Let me share screen again. Okay, can you guys see this share screen again? Okay. I mean, chess base 17 is insane. I mean, I don't know. I recommend staying with 16 if you guys have it. I've had some big problems with chess base 17, so it just completely crashed. So hopefully we don't have that problem again. But okay, back to this position here. So clearly white is really on the ropes. The g3 pawn is being attacked. The rook on b2 is really kind of restricting, our play, as well as, we would love to play a move like king f2 and just kind of fix the position in that way, but we can't. So this is a very, very uncomfortable position. We have a couple of ways to defend the g3 pawn, some better than others. And I spent not much time here and chose the incorrect path forward. Okay, so I chose the incorrect path forward here, and it definitely cost me positionally for the next few moves. And from this point forward, I actually won't have as many stopping points. I will just kind of lecture and illustrate the rest of the game and how I was able to swindle and get myself out of the hole that I created. But I want you guys to consider your options here of how you can defend the G3 pawn and choose the right one, hopefully. Okay, so for this one, I'll give you guys 2 minutes. All right, so until 20. All right, so 2 minutes here, white to play. Consider your options, consider the consequences of the options that you have here, and choose the best plan forward. Remember, this is a very uncomfortable position. You have a couple options here to compare the few options. You should be calculating, you should be evaluating and considering the consequences of each move, and how it would affect your position. So if you have a move in mind, ideally you should provide more information about the position beyond just the move itself. Okay, so I'll give you guys a minute and a half now, minute and a half. All right, 30 more seconds. All right. So I don't think anyone correctly chose the right path forward, but what I will do is I will go over the different options people gave and discuss the options, discuss how it affects the position, and then at the end, discuss what the best plan forward should have been here for white. So quite a few people gave these rook moves, like rook g1 and rook h3. And while these moves, like, okay, rook g1 or rook h3, they do defend the g3 pawn, and they don't like immediately lose. The issue that I have with those positions is I don't really see how your plan forward is in terms of fixing your position, in terms of like, getting out of this kind of grip that black has over your position. For example, after rook h3 or rook g1, honestly, both of them. Like, what is your plan forward here for like how you're going to get your king to safety, or how you're going to fix all of your weaknesses? People gave like a move like bishop b3 or like bishop e2, but I still don't see how that's going to fix your position. You still have issues. For example, a move like rook h2 would be a possibility, and on rook h3, a move like rook to g2 is a possibility. And so there's still a lot of ways that black will put pressure on your position. And once again, white's path towards equality or even remotely fixing our position is slim to none, honestly. Without the possibility of castling at some point or connecting the rooks at some point, or getting any activity, it's going to be very hard for white. Okay, so the rook moves are decent. They don't immediately lose by any stretch of the imagination. There's no kind of tactics here that would win for black, but it's just very uncomfortable, and the path forward towards equality is slim to none in those types of positions. It's just practically very, very hard to play. All right, so another majority of people played f4, and actually I would say Most people played f4. And this was the move that I chose, actually. And quite a few people actually saw how black should play against f4, which was knight f6. Okay, remember, when you're going to play a move like f4 to defend these weaknesses, consider what other weaknesses it's created, right? It's created the weakness of potentially the pawn e4, the square on g4. And so this knight hopping to f6 is very valuable to take advantage of the e4 pawn as well as the g4 square. Okay, and so I saw one or two people give bishop b3 now as a possibility, a very creative possibility, actually, because it attacks the rook on b2. It also attacks the pawn on c6. So there's not even any knight takes e4 here, not just because the rook's hanging, but also even because of this tactic. All right. And so here, black has a very, very dominating move, which is queen to b4. And this is not an easy move to see, but once you kind of see the move itself and see the ideas that are potentially behind it, it's quite apparent how strong it is. White's basically forced to trade, and then very likely play e5, otherwise you're going to lose the pawn. There's no other way to defend the pawn. And now black will come in. All right, so regardless, white's losing material. Actually, probably here, white just has to give up the pawn, unfortunately. There's not really much of a choice. And so, you know, the main problem of our position initially here was the fact that our king was weak and we had weaknesses. And so it's kind of unintuitive, actually, for black to trade the queens. But once you create even more weaknesses in your position, the possibility of the queen trade and going into a favorable endgame for black is actually a very, very dangerous one. Okay, so now some people are realizing, some people are texting me that the answer very likely then is e5. And now during the game, I very, very quickly dismissed e5 because in my mind, it's sure it fixes the pawn on g3 and it's also secure, but I was very worried about c5. I was very worried about knight b6, not here, but the idea of later on knight b6, knight d5. I was also even still worried about move like queen b4, and same thing, knight b6, knight d5. But the computer gives us as the most solid solution to our problems. For example, after this, maybe we can take, and maybe offer a rook trade. So for example, rook d2. If the rook gives check, same thing, offer rook trade. And with less pieces on the board, as well as, you know, these weaknesses not being so bad, this structure not being so bad, and this knight not really having immediate access to the game. For example, take, knight b6, bishop b3. We control all these entry points, and at the very least, something like this perhaps could happen, right? And this is very drawish, very equal. Maybe even white's already better at this point because a more active king. But black is still pressing. Someone's texted me that they believe that black is still pressing. This is definitely true. In this position right here, I mean, I certainly think that black is still the one who has more pressure. For example, let's say check, trade, knight to b6, and now let's say king to e7, bringing the rook in. Certainly, black is definitely the one to be preferred. But this is the closest that we've seen to equality in all the positions, all the things that we've seen so far. So instead, I played f4 once again very quickly because I thought that it was my only option. I thought that e5 was too weakening, and unfortunately, I completely forgot about this move knight f6 and how this will not only dominate the e4 pawn and the e4 square, but also has the possibility coming into g4. And also, what I had underestimated here was the trade of the queens on b4. So I completely underestimated the fact that black could trade the queens and have a much better position. Okay, so here actually, once again, we won't have that many stopping points from here on out. I kind of want to show you guys how I was actually able to somehow not only save this game but win this game. And so I castled. Kind of a crazy move, right? But I'm just completely sacrificing this pawn. Completely sacrificing this pawn in order for my king to have some semblance of safety. I go queen f3, knight d6, and instead of taking on c6, which would be fine, but after king e7, now rook c8 comes, and I still have a bunch of weaknesses. Knight f5, targeting all these weaknesses that I have. And so instead of taking on c6, I actually go bishop to b3. So I go bishop to b3, potentially going for a trap of the rook on b2, still keeping the option of attacking on c6 open, and you know, just trying to hang by a thread. Absolutely trying to hang by a thread. So before I show you guys the rest of the game, I actually want to use this game and this example as a segue into actually what my next series will be, at least hopefully will be, which is the art of swindling and the science of conversion. So that ideally will be my next topic for the next series. The reason why I'm choosing that topic is actually the topic of especially swindling, but also conversion is I tend to be actually very good at swindling. I don't know if anyone has ever seen me play in tournaments or seen my games or seen the games I've shown you guys so far in this series. Um, I I actually have a very good knack for winning or drawing from completely lost positions. And the reason that is because I'm able to bring the practical aspect of chess into this game. And the practical aspect of chess in this case is the ability to understand which positions are humanly difficult to play. Mostly, obviously, for your opponent, right? You don't want the positions to be humanly difficult for yourself to play, right? So that's actually particularly why I chose not to take on c6, because I realized that the position here is very easy for black to play. Black brings the rook in. Black has probably no worries at all here and would probably very easily overpower me. But now by keeping my options open here, putting the bishop on b3, kind of holding over the fact that the rook on b2 could be trapped over my opponent, I'm giving my opponent more kind of things to think about and more things to have to consider as well as spend time on. And that's another thing. Another part of practical play is actually the process of giving your opponent tough decisions to make and getting them low on time. Because sometimes if your position's way too far gone, if you're completely lost, the only thing that could possibly be a saving factor for you is actually the time, right? The fact that they get low on time and make mistakes because of that. So obviously when we get into the series, later on, perhaps in August forwards, I'll be giving you guys a lot more of these kind of small tips and ideas that I've realized over my years of swindling my opponents. But for now, this is kind of what I wanted to mention. And likely for the rest of this game in particular, there won't be many stopping points, but just stay tuned into how I was able to somehow get myself out of this insane hole that I've dug. So my opponent here, after bishop b3, decides to castle. So same thing. Completely inviting me to take this pawn on c6. And should I take the pawn on c6, it's very similar case would happen. The rook would come to c8, and black would have very, very easy play. So instead, here I go queen c3. Obviously now the rook actually only has one square safely to go, so my opponent goes to e2. I go back to f3. Obviously, my opponent does not want to take a draw and go back to b2, so black is obliged to play queen to b5. So queen to b5, and now I go a4. Now giving my opponent a decision to make here, and actually not perhaps an easy one to make. And I didn't actually realize that it was a hard decision to make because during the game, I was thinking about this exact topic, this exact idea, which is which positions are practically difficult to convert for my opponent, right? My opponent is trying to convert this game from a winning advantage into a win. And so in my mind, I saw here there was two squares this queen can go to that defend the rook on e2, a6 and h5. Now, against queen h5, I have the possibility of playing g4, which would actually win the rook on e2. On queen a6, even though it seems a little bit awkward on e6, it's actually a very secure square that defends the rook on e2 and pretty much avoids all major tactics. For example, queen a6, if I go like rook c1 here, black has rook c8, I believe. Or maybe there's bishop c4. What was the move here that I thought that black had? I think it was maybe rook b2. Yeah, rook b2. Because now on a move like rook takes c6, I believe there's like rook takes b3 or maybe even queen b7. So now something like this would be probably a very difficult position to play for whites, and the rook endgame is very difficult. So something like this. It's actually not so easy, not so direct, which is exactly why I went for this continuation, and actually exactly why my opponent probably was concerned. So for example, after rook c1, the reason why black can't go rook c8 is because I have this very nice bishop c4 move. So, once again, more tactics on the horizon. So because of this, my opponents wanted to evade these shenanigans, and in his mind, played queen h5, which to him seems simpler, less complex, but actually provided me still chances. So now queen h5, g4. His whole idea is to take on h4. Queen takes e2, and now go queen g3. I now go queen to, or sorry, I go king h1, takes on b3, and now rook to d3. So if you notice in this position, it's actually equal material, right? In theory, it's equal material, and I should be doing quote unquote okay. But my pawns are very advanced, which means I have a lot of weaknesses. Black's knight is very powerful. My king is also kind of in the headwinds right here, not very safe. And so overall, it's just not a very easy position to play for white at all, actually. However, it's definitely a step above what I had before, because now my opponent is actually starting to get a little bit lower on time and has to be accurate to convert this position forwards. One of the ideas that I had, and one of the reasons why my opponent actually here decided not to capture this pawn on a4, is because I was actually considering ideas of playing, like, for example, queen h2, something like this, with ideas of rook h3, and actually just going straight for the kill, straight for checkmate. And so it's probably stuff like this that caused my opponents to be a little bit iffy. Now here there is queen c4 ideas, so there's no rook h3, but it's not particularly the move queen h2 that would probably concern my opponent. Maybe rook h3 is a better choice, or maybe even f5, or maybe something like king g2 to play rook h1 and rook h3, stuff like this on the h file. I assume this is part of the reason why my opponent opted for queen d5 instead. Just centralizing the queen, ideas of playing knight c4 or knight e4, and overall it seems very, very secure. So now I go king g1, and now my opponent goes rook b8. So once again, part of the reason why my opponent went queen d5 is just it seems like black has complete control here with rook to b8, and bring the rook in to either b4 or maybe even b3, b2 later on. Still knight c4 is on the horizon, still knight e4 is on the horizon, but actually rook b8 was the decisive move that lost all of black's advantage. And here I seized and I took advantage of this moment and played the very powerful rook c1, rook b4, and then queen e5. Very, very good continuation here that not only takes advantage of my rook's kind of coordination, actually, defending the pawn on d4 and this rook attacking the pawn on c6, but also now the fact that this queen is quote-unquote trapped. It can't move to a lot of these squares because of the knight on d6. And white is more than happy to trade these queens off and get into the endgame. Okay? So now already at this point, my opponent was very frustrated with himself because he's now taking this position that should have been, very, very good position, close to winning. And now actually he needs to be even careful not to blow this and, as we saw in the game, lose it. So my opponent takes on a4. Instead, probably, he should have prioritized the safety of his king and played a move like knight c4. This is probably what he should have done, because now there's no infiltration along the c-file, and there's no kind of entry point for me in that way. Instead, my opponent takes on a4. I take on d5, c takes d5, rook c6. Now this knight is kind of low on squares, and kind of beautifully, if my opponent were to go like this is checkmate. So now my opponent instead has to go knight to e8. I go rook f5, which was a very, very clever idea. And part of actually kind of swindling and converting, or I guess even for me now, converting a position like this is once again putting clock pressure and making complex looking moves, or even just simply complex moves. The whole point of this is if e takes f5, I go rook to c8, followed by rook to e3, and there you go. The knight is lost. So here after f5, my opponent captures first, and now plays rook to c4. Okay, so now I go rook to b6, same idea. My opponent captures, I still have rook to b8. And now instead, my opponent goes a4. I make this capture, and knight f6. So in this moment, my opponent actually offered me a draw. The time situation, I have it right here in my notes, was my opponent had 4 minutes to my 13 minutes. Now, a big part of me actually was inclined to take the draw. I mean, it does seem kind of drawish. It seems like, black has a very secure rook on the c4, the knight on f6, defending the pawn on d5, the pawn on g7, defending the knight on f6. Also, this pawn on a4 is, relatively well advanced. And at first glance, it seems like the game is nearing towards a draw. Or actually, it even seems like black doesn't really have many worries at all. And once again, part of that mentality, that psychology, is the fact that earlier on in the position, I was losing, right? I was very close to it, almost dead loss. And so part of what I was thinking in my mind was, yeah, I mean, a draw is a good result anyways. I get to go home early, prepare for my next game in the morning. And so I was very, very close to accepting the draw. However, I kept telling myself that, to not settle, to basically realize that I actually had play here and to press my opponent. Because as it turns out, this pawn on g7 actually is a weakness because of this move rook e7. So now I have ideas of playing rook to g3 and capturing it and, giving my opponent some worries, right? I mean, for example, if my opponent played, like, let's say, I think he went knight e4, but let's say he played like rook b4, right? Already rook g3 would be a very, very big threat. Example, takes, well, something like this would be very uncomfortable for black to handle. Okay, so even though I think black should, in theory, be okay here, I think maybe something like rook to g4 followed by rook to g6 and hanging on literally by a thread. But as you guys can see, it's pressure. It's active and actual pressure that I have on my opponent. All right, so here he goes 90. Instead he goes 94, and I'll kind of just speed through a little bit and show you guys the progression of how I was able to sort of take over. Rook to d7, attacking the d5 pawn. Bring the rook down to a7 to cover the a4 pawn as well as attack the g7 pawn still. Knight goes back to e4, and now I bring my king in. I'm in no rush, right? The rook on a7, very well placed. Rook on d3, it's doing its job of defending the d4 pawn. And now I have time to hopefully bring my king in, for example, like this, and put some pressure. So my opponent goes king h7, I go king f3, rook to c6, trying to cut my king off or swing the rook over. His idea now is that, okay, at some point he realized this a4 pawn's not really doing himself any favors. So for example, takes, and now maybe like a rook f6 move, and basically black is going to try to fortress up. So instead here I realized, no need. Let's play king f4, rook h6, king e5, rook h5, king e6. So clearly I've made a lot of progress. I have taken the position from being my king on g1, my rook on, I think it was e6, to now my rook on a7 being very dominating, my king going from g1 to e6, black's rook very passive on h5, and already at this point, I was starting to feel like, oh, actually, maybe I can, I can win this game. And so my opponent goes king h6. I now swing my rook over because the rook no longer has to defend the d4 pawn. Okay, give a check, and finally capture the pawn on a4. And now swing my rooks over like this. Okay, so finally I capture the a4 pawn, and my king's active. I have pressure on the d5 pawn, and everything seems to be going very, very well for me. Very, very well at this point. And actually, the computer now shows that I have a winning advantage. Unfortunately, so I play rook h4, which is a fine move, defending the d4 pawn as well as covering a knight f4 check. My opponent goes back. I now go rook e1, threatening something like rook to e5. My opponent goes rook g2. So this will be the last stopping point in the game, where hopefully you guys can find what I missed in terms of a win here. Okay, so I missed the win here, but I will show you guys how the game finished. The game was basically like a time scramble at the end, and I'll show you guys how that looked like. But what I do want you guys to do is find how white wins the game right here. All right, so I'll give everyone 2 minutes. Once again, you're just typing privately your answers for how you think that white should convert the game here, and we'll check back in another 2 minutes. All right, so white's play. when possible to give justification for your moves or your ideas. So keep that in mind. One more minute. One more minute. Fifteen more seconds to send any answers that you guys might have. All right. So quite a few people actually got it right here. And one of the most important things to realize in a position like this, where you can feel the win almost there, especially in these end games, you can feel the win almost there. You can feel it almost in your grasp. And one of the very, very key questions to ask yourself is, what is my winning plan? How am I going to win this position? What is my winning plan? And in this case, the winning plan should be fairly direct, which is the reason why black is holding on here is because of the extra rook on the board. Or not extra rook on the board, but black's rook on the board. Black's rook is doing a very good job here of, well, defending against checkmate, defending the d5 pawn sometimes, also harassing our own d4 pawn, and just overall is definitely black's best piece. If these rooks were traded off the board, the knight on f6 would not be able to contain both the king infiltrating on the f7, f5 square, as well as the d5 pawn. Okay, and so we'll see that highlighted very, very soon. So the idea, as many, many people have already realized, was rook h1. So rook h1 here, understanding the importance of trading the rooks and forcing the rooks off the board. Instead here, I play rook to e3. And my whole idea was to do the same thing, but for some reason I wanted to play rook e3, and then on rook to g5, my idea was to play rook h3. I mean, it doesn't really make too much sense, but that was kind of my plan, or something along those lines. I think maybe also I was trying to buy time because we were both kind of low on time, so I thought here that black had to go back to g5 or maybe to g1. So another idea I had was like, let's say rook to g1, rook to e2, and same thing, rook h2 and rook g2. So I just was not decisive enough, didn't seize my opportunity. And so as many people noted, rook h1 here is the way forward. Forcing the rooks off, because, for example, if the rook goes this way, this would be checkmate, actually. So now, for example, against the rook to g5, probably here rook to eg1 is the safest. Knight g4 would be met with, I thought rook h4, but actually rook h3 is even more accurate. Just simply doubling the rooks. And actually, simply put, black doesn't even have a move here. The king can't move, the rook can't move, so the knight has to move. So basically, the rooks will be traded off anyways. So, and also in this case, if the rooks get traded like this, just to simply demonstrate, same thing. King f7. Now, the knight will just not be able to perform every task that it needs to. So, for example, like let's say knight h5, rook to g6 check, and now rook to g5. And of course, once white wins one of these pawns, it's basically game over. Okay. So instead, I missed my opportunity, played rook to e3 instead, and my opponent plays king g5, the move that I totally forgot about. Totally forgot about this move. Now my opponent's king is actually starting to get active, and I need to be very careful not to allow the king out of its kind of shell that I've created. So I go rook h3, rook to g4, and now I finally tried to offer the trade. Unfortunately, now this move king f4 comes, and if I go rook takes g4 here, black probably can even take on g4 here, but even also I was worried about taking on e3 here. Rook g7, and somehow, I guess this doesn't work because the knight can't move. But I was mostly, of course, worried about knight takes g4. And now with black's king active, my pawn on d4 could potentially be in danger. For example, rook to e1 would be met with like knight e3, king e4, and taking the pawn. So it's a very, very direct kind of a draw that black might have here. So instead, I gave a check. Now went king e5, and I'm just trying to keep the tension. Clearly, it's been a step in the wrong direction. Once again, we were both kind of low on time, and so I'll show you guys the end of this game. It was very, very nice. So king g6, rook g3, once again offering the trade of the queen, the trade of the rooks. I unfortunately can't do it here because of knight takes g4 and the rook on e3. So I swing my rook over. He gives a check. I play king f5, and now knight g8, a move that I completely missed. I thought here actually I was once again taking over because if black takes my final pawn, I now go rook to a7, something like king to f8, and now actually I'm very close to checkmating here. Game's probably already immediately over. So knight g8, a move that I totally missed. And actually, I need to be a little bit careful not to somehow get mated here. For example, there's some crazy mates where like black goes like knight h6 and rook g4, something along those lines, or I get forced to like lose a rook or something. And so here I play rook a4, finally defending my pawn. Very, very precarious, but I had to do what I had to do. Knight e7, and now knight c6. And unfortunately, now it seems like my pawn is lost, and I was actually almost ready to throw in the towel right here. But then I found rook f3, and then rook f4. So not throwing the towel just quite yet, trying to be persistent, and trying to keep up my pressure. Black went rook to e1. I went rook to a6. He gave a check, and gave another check to play g5 to displace my rook, and now finally win my pawn. Probably thinking, finally at last, the game is over. But what he didn't realize here is that he still needed to be precise. What he probably forgot about is that with his pawn move g5, my rook on a6 will cut this king off, and the king won't have much of access back to safety. I now go rook f5, he captured, and now I take on d5. And actually the position is not so easy. Knight can't go back to e6 because of rook e5, which would win the knight. And otherwise, knight is kind of running low on squares. So he went knight f3, and now I played rook to b5. All of a sudden, big checkmating threats occurring. Rook to d1. I now went rook to g6. Threats of check plus mate, as well as just overall, like threats of even rook g7, or maybe doubling this way. He gives a check. I now go king g7. I think already at this point, the game was close to over. He went rook back to d1. Now I went rook f6, which was a devastating move that he definitely forgot about. Attacking the knight on f3, as well as now rook to b7, followed by rook to f8 mate. So now he actually resigned. So for example, g4, check. If the king goes back rank, it's checkmate. If rook d7, now rook f7. So definitely a devastating game for him, and a very, very good start for myself. To not only overcome the much worse position, but to also push past my intentionality to want to make a draw, or to not lose. Right, at some point my whole mentality was I just don't want to lose here. And so I was able to push past that, be persistent. Now, of course, at one point, I missed the win under time trouble for both of us. And so that was a bit unfortunate, but I kept pushing. And as you guys could see, the pressure paid off. And it's sometimes what happens, right? If you keep pushing, keep pressing, the more pressure you apply, the more chances you'll give yourself. Okay? So we're going to see one more game, the last game here. So let me know if you guys can see. Hopefully my chess base doesn't crash again. Maybe I'll have to share a screen again. Let's see right here. Okay, let me try this again. Let me stop sharing. I might have to restart my chess base. So 1 second here. I want to show one more game, the last game of this whole entire series. Of course, this whole tournament, to make a GM norm, you have to have quite a few wins. I actually won 5 games this tournament. We don't have time to look at all of them. But this game right here was very, very pivotal in my my momentum for the whole event. So this one actually was a win in 17 moves with the black pieces against international master Kyron Griffith. So a very, very powerful win, which definitely catapulted me to my last one. Okay, so all right, here we go. Okay, So someone's asking if I'm GM. Unfortunately, not yet. I still need to get 2,500. All right, so it was a Sicilian, a nice classical Sicilian, and my opponent opts for a little bit of a sideline with f3. I go e5, bishop e7, and here white opts for queen e2. One of the other variations is queen to d2, which would allow d5, and this is kind of an endgame. For example, something like this is a very typical kind of endgame. I believe that black takes with the queen, and something very similar to this can occur. So the whole point of queen e2 is that white wants to go for castle's queen side, and so if I were to go to d5, which is actually sort of a mistake here, white can capture, and I believe capture again, and then go for something like castle queen side. And now white has some good initiative. Okay, so instead I go castles here, castles queen side, queen c8. So this is just theory. I'm getting my queen off of the d file and preparing for my queen side play. White goes g4, and I go a5. And here white veers off of the main line. I believe Kyron just was not either not prepared here or kind of forgot his lines and played knight a4. Okay, so this will be our first stopping point. 2 minutes. Black to play. So there's a threat of knight b6, and in general, in these types of positions, especially Sicilian types of positions, you need to realize and understand your path forward to launching an attack, or overall how you put pressure on your opponent. And okay, yeah, we'll see. Yeah, I had opened it up, and as soon as I opened it up, someone sent an answer to private. Oh, sorry, to everyone. Okay, so that's okay. But everyone, 2 minutes here. All right, 2 minutes, black to play. It's very important, and especially in these types of positions, that you're very careful, very cautious, and you're planned forward. Okay. All right. One more minute. One more minute. All right. So almost everyone gave the answer that Vihan had put in the chat. Hopefully not by on purpose, but just by coincidence. It is a good it's a good idea. It's a good move, and it's the move that I actually played in the game. However, this actually was a missed opportunity, and someone in the chat actually has narrowed down the best move here. Unfortunately, did not give the best continuation, but was the best move, which is in these types of positions. Yes, looking for prophylactic move like knight d7. Knight d7 is the best prophylactic move against knight b6 as an idea. Not only does it defend the b6 square, but it prepares black against g5 ideas. It also brings another piece over to the attack on the queen side. But in these types of positions, it's almost always important to look for the dynamic moves, such as knight to b4. Now, of course, when you play a move like knight to b4, you should immediately be aware of the consequences of the still knight b6. Of course, against a3, there's bishop takes b3, and so this is not good for white. So let's say knight b6. Okay, queen now goes to c6, the most natural square. Knight takes a8, and someone in the chat had offered queen a4 as an idea, which actually I think is somewhat strong, but maybe white now brings the knight back to b6, or maybe actually can survive with a3, I guess. And white is kind of hanging on by a thread here. Very much so by a thread. Okay. Yeah, the move is rook takes a8, which the person who had put queen a4 in the chat meant to take first, but okay, that's not so obvious. I mean, queen a4 is a strong move as well. I mean, also you can take on a2 as well as go queen a4 here too, which also would not work because of knight b6 here. So okay, it wasn't so obvious, but yes, rook takes a8 first. And the reason why I actually had turned this down in the game was not because of a3, because a3 actually takes b3 is just devastating, something like this. Black is completely taking over here. The reason why in the game I had not played this is because I thought king to b1 would save white, but I totally forgot about queen a4 here, and so that's probably what they meant. And now after a3, knight c2 is completely crushing. So this is just over, basically. So going back to this original position, white needs to play this, and the only move basically to survive after rook takes a8 is something like knight to a1. Like this is it's like one of the only moves to survive here and not like immediately lose. So basically you guys get the gist. Knight b4 would have been pretty much crushing almost on the spot. So instead I went knight to d7 and my opponent went queen to b5. I now played knight b4, so still played the same idea, and now knight c3. All right, this will be the second to last stopping point of the game. Black to play. Black to play and find the best continuation here. All right, 30 more seconds. Let's try to find this one right here. So seeing some good ideas in the chat, some good ideas. So basically a lot of people narrowed down to a few main ones. The main ones were either a4, or I think some people were offering bishop takes b3, or maybe even d5 to crash through, as well as knight takes a2. So knight takes a2 was also a main idea. So a4 is not bad. It's not the best. Here, for example, queen takes b4 takes, and now a takes b3. I think white might be getting away here. The main issue is that you don't really have d5 because now I'll take. And I mean, you could go d4 here, but now, for example, I could at the very least, yeah, I guess I could go even bishop d2 because you don't have rook a1 because I go knight b1, and white's barely surviving here, but surviving and up a piece. So maybe there is knight c5. Maybe here actually white needs to go c3 instead. This is kind of crazy, but I mean, definitely, this is a very one of the more convincing lines that white needs to consider, and black could be winning in those. But actually, the most direct actually is knight x8. So for those of you who saw this, bravo. It's kind of hard to look for a move like this, especially because it just seems like a very fruitless sacrifice. But after knight takes a2, there's this very powerful move a4. Not oftentimes you see knights being skewered like this by the bishop skewering two knights like this. And this is very crushing, very, very crushing. Okay, so if this knight moves, then the knight on a2 is lost, and of course, if the knight does not move, then we inevitably take the knight on b3, and the a file gets opened. So probably white should have like moved this knight, or maybe play like knight c3, and after pawn takes, try to hang on by a thread like this. But definitely white is, nearly getting crushed here, and there's a lot of different moves that black has here to take a very significant advantage. Instead, my opponent goes king b1, tried to keep the integrity of the queen side as much as possible, maybe get the king off of the c file, and after pawn takes, let's find the finishing blow, everyone. So 1 minute, last minute of this whole entire series. Black to play and win. All right, so it seems like almost everyone is finding this one pretty much up everyone's alley in terms of just like this, right? Everyone is kind of enjoying this position for black and finding the best continuation. So yes, pretty much everyone who sent their answers in, it was very excited to sacrifice the rook on a2, king takes a2, queen c2, with not only the threat of rook a8 mate, but also the rook on d1, and this is absolutely crushing. And yes, the score sheets were assigned here. White resigned, and I won. So this game right here took me to 3.5 out of 4 in the tournament, which means I only had needed one more win. I actually won the next 2 games after that, so I was on 5.5 out of 6. Took a couple draws, and then I actually tried to push for 2,500. If I had gone 8 out of 9 in the tournament, I would have actually made GM that tournament. And so I pushed pretty hard for those final points. I unfortunately lost round 8 and took a draw in round 9 to finish on 6.5 out of 9, which is what I needed for the last norm. And so after that tournament, I was 2490 with 3 norms. And as you guys know, I've talked about, I unfortunately I'm no longer close. So I have a lot of work to do, as does everyone, to improve on their chess, to work on their chess, and to get better. And so I hope through this process, this series, reviewing my victories as well as losses in 2023, you guys were able to get a glimmer of some chess psychology, some mentalities that could help, or some mentalities that would not help and are better to avoid. Obviously, also some strategic ideas as well as tactical ideas all throughout. It's definitely been a fun series with you guys. Thank you for tuning in. Like I said, today was a bit of a smaller class because of the summer, and this weekend is very hot for some tournaments, and so I appreciate those of you guys who showed up for this last session. Look forward to whenever my next session will be. I do believe that I should be coming back. That's the plan at least. And as I mentioned earlier, the topic, the theme will likely be on conversion as well as swindling. So something to look forward to. All right. So thank you guys for tuning in. That is the conclusion of this mini series, or I guess it was no longer a mini series, but a full-on series. And I hope you guys have a good rest of your evening, and I will see you guys likely, hopefully, next month. Take care, everyone.